Hey, what's up, gamers? So I want to yap a bit about the Switch 2 with high resolution and frame rates depending on capture cards and displays and stuff because it's a bit weird. So I want to yap a bit about that here and what's going on. So right now, my Nintendo Switch 2 is plugged into the Avermedia Live Gamer 4K. The model number is GC573. It is an HDMI 2.0 capture card. There is a 2.1 version. I don't have that one. I have the 2.0 version. So yeah. And then from that capture card, it is being plugged into my Alienware DWF OLED ultra wide monitor. It's a 1440p monitor, 165 hertz. So yeah, we're gonna hop into system settings, go into display. We're gonna be looking at dock output information to see what we're doing. We're doing 1440p, 60 FPS with HDR. Also, you could see at the bottom that in theory, what should be possible is 1440p, 60 FPS, and 120 FPS with HDR on and off, or in HDR and SDR. So it should all be possible in 1440p. This is a 1440p monitor at the end of the day. If you go to resolution, you can also see that 1440p is selectable, but also 4K. If I select 4K, it's the average 60 hertz HDR, SDR stuff that the Switch 2 does. So give it a sec. You can see here, that's what it does. We're going to go back to 1440p as that's what this monitor does. And in theory, everything should be possible in 1440p. All right, first, let's show you, real quick, I do want to say as like a quick PSA for Switch 2 owners, if you go to display, by the way, I'm on firmware 21.0.0. That'll be important later on. But if we go to display, go down to HDR output. You want to select this to compatible software only. By default, it is for all software. What this means on compatible software is if I boot up a title like Splatoon 3 or Legend ZA, the Switch 2 edition, the system will switch to SDR because that game is a Switch 1 game designed with SDR. So even like Pokemon Legends ZA, that is a Switch 2 edition game, and that will switch to SDR for that one because the game, even though it is a Switch 2 edition game with a Switch 2 edition opening, as you'll see here, it is not designed to utilize HDR output. If I go into system settings, go into display, dock output information, you can see we're doing 1440p, 60 hertz, and SDR. No HDR right now. Cool. Let's get HDR going. All right. Let's see here. Let's do the Kirby Air Riders test because the game doesn't come out until midnight, and that's like 12 hours away. Screen's taking a sec. There it is. If we go and check our output now, it should be 1440p 60 hertz at HDR. Cool. Let's test out some 120 hertz action, all right? I do have the toggle on display set to 120 hertz output right here, so it should do it. We're gonna go into Silksong. That is a SDR game that supports 120 hertz. You will have to enable it in the game settings, but it does work. So right now it should be in 60 hertz. Let's actually go take a look and see what it's doing real quick because I know it has a switch on my TV. Display. Where's display at? Here. Yeah, we're doing 1440. Okay, we're doing 1440p 60 hertz right now in SDR. And then when the game goes to the main menu in a sec, it will switch to 120 hertz. There it is. There's the 120 hertz switch. I don't see it on my screen yet, but yeah. If we go in the options, you go into game. Right here is TV mode frame rate. That's where you can get 120 hertz working in the game. But now, if I go in to check my dock output information, as expected, it should be doing 1440p 120 hertz, which it is. But now, if we go into Welcome Tour and add on some HDR to the 1440p 120 hertz, give me a sec to do that. So when I boot in the Welcome Tour, it's going to do 60 FPS until the system engages 120 FPS in a minigame or in some activity that needs it. So right now it's doing 60 hertz HDR. In fact, if I go check the display settings again, I can verify that. Go into display here. You can see you're doing 1440p 60 FPS HDR. If I do this frame rate minigame test here, this is located on the bottom right of the Switch 2 LCD screen. Sorry for the daycare kids and like my mom talking to them. Can't really help that much. So now we're in 120 hertz mode in HDR. If I go and check out our display resolution or our display output stuff, oh, we're doing 1080p 120 hertz HDR. When I looked at 1440p, if I close out a welcome tour here, put it back in 1440p mode, you would see at the bottom of that dock output information screen, if I go into here, you'll see that in theory, with HDR, 1440p 120 hertz should be possible. But for some reason, it's not working. I think this is a limitation with the Avermedia GC573 capture card. So, yeah, I think it needs an update. Up next, I'm going to switch this Nintendo Switch 2 over to my LG OLED TV. So we're going to have Nintendo Switch 2 plugged into Avermedia Live Gamer 4K GC573, which is then plugged into the LG C4 OLED TV. So I'll be right back. All right, we are now on the LG C4 OLED TV. If I go into system settings, go to display, can verify that. If we go to TV resolution, you can see 1440p is actually grayed out. Now, I'm on firmware 21.0.0. Before this firmware, 1440p would not function at all. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, so let's go and so the usual 4K 60 stuff between 4K 60 SDR and HDR for games like Legend ZA and Air Riders, as I showed you earlier. So let's go and test out some 120 hertz action. So we're gonna go into Hollow Knight Silk Song. This is an SDR 120 hertz title, as I just showed you on the DWF OLED monitor. So now we are in 60 hertz. So if I go and check out the display settings, you can see we're doing 4K 60 SDR. This would be the case with the monitor if I had it set to 4K. So nothing is out of the ordinary here. It's just when the system engages 120 hertz, things are better now than what they used to be, but there is some jank with it still. So here's the 120 hertz switch. If we go and check out our docked output information under display, you can see we're doing 1440p 120 hertz now. This never used to be possible on LG OLED displays. This would do 1080p 120 hertz. But now it is possible to do that as of firmware 21.0.0. But with one caveat, connected to this capture card, you can see with HDR, 1440p does not function at anything. And also 60 hertz doesn't show as well. For 1440p. So Nintendo kind of did a very quick band-aid approach to get high frame rate stuff working, but nothing on 60 hertz, nothing on nothing on that. So yeah, so 1440p does work now as of firmware 21.0.0. But with this capture card, if I go into Welcome Tour and do that frame rate test to add in HDR to 1440p 120 hertz, you'll see that it doesn't actually work. Actually, I can go test now. Let's go take a looky. Go into display here. So you can see now we're doing 1080p 120 hertz in HDR, which is weird because if I move my Switch 2 and plug it into an HDMI 2.1 capture card, like I have here the Avermedia Live Gamer Ultra 2.1. Otherwise, the model number for that is the GC573G2. If I'm corrected, I could be wrong. Give me a sec to switch it over to that capture card in a moment. All right, so that is the Live Gamer 4K that you see on screen. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn on the Live Gamer Ultra. Wow. Technical difficulties, am I right? All right, so for some reason, the TV resolution was 1440p. As you can tell, that does not work, so that's why it wasn't displaying anything. for you all. Although I think it might have been working on the TV. I don't know. Whatever. We're here now. So we still have that frame rate test open right here. So let's go and check out our output resolution from the capture card. With this one, you can see we're doing 1440p 120 Hz in HDR now. This is the same when plugging directly into the LGC4 or when going through a different capture card like the Avermedia 4KX. So yeah, 1440p 120 Hz does work with this system. Now I'm going to switch back to, and by the way, 1440p 60 Hz SDR, HDR, oh not 60 Hz, but 1440p 120 Hz SDR does work as well. I can show you that in a moment. With this other capture card, the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1. So now we're in 4K 60. And now we are switching into 4K, or no, 1440p 120. So now you can see in a second, 1440p 120 Hz SDR does work. So yeah. And you know, right now it is switching back to 4K. 4K 60 SDR. Oops. Basically, for the UI, whatever mode was last used by the game will be used for the system UI, which is really dumb. But yeah, so right now it is an SDR. If I go and boot up this Kirby Air Rider test demo, the UI will be stuck in HDR once it is engaged in HDR, which is really weird. As you can see right now, it's in HDR, or at least I can visibly see it on my TV. But if I go check it out here, you'll see that the UI is in HDR despite the game being closed. Yeah, it's really weird. You think they would just put the UI in whatever it was made for, but okay. Anywho, one last test I'm going to do. I'm going to plug in the PlayStation 5, a PS5 Slim with the disc edition, plugging that into my first capture card that we tested today, the Avermedia Live Gamer 4K GC573, and I'm going to plug that capture card into my LG C4 OLED TV to verify that 1440p, 120 Hz, and HDR all do function on that capture card. So I'll be right back on the PS5. All right, so what you're seeing is the no output screen from the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1. Gonna turn that off, turn on the Live Gamer 4K. I need to switch my TV to show the right output so I could see that. All right, we go into information from the current HDMI device, go to 1440p. You can see here that 1440p 120 Hz HDR does work. In fact, if we do this testing, it'll first do 1440p 60 Hz in SDR, 1440p 60 Hz in HDR, and 1440p 120 Hz in HDR. For some reason, it doesn't test SDR, but I can probably give you a test of that too. So 1440p 60 Hz SDR does work. We can see that in a moment. 1440p 60 Hz HDR does indeed work with this capture card. And finally, 1440p 120 Hz HDR does work on this capture card, yet it doesn't on the Switch 2. If I run into resolution here, we'll select 1440p. And I will turn off HDR. So we're going to go down to HDR here. Going to turn it off. And you can see that we are doing 1440p 60 Hz SDR. So this capture card is fully capable of supporting 1440p resolutions at 120 Hz in HDR. Like it can do that. If I even go down here and turn on HDR again, because it is supported by the UI of the PS5, you can even see that it is outputting it as we speak. Oh wait, it's 60 Hz. Never mind. Well, I would say as we speak, but I gotta boot up a game like Ratchet and Clank or something to show that. But it does work. It did show it off in the test, so it does work. It just needs an update from, I assume, the Avermedia capture card. So what I assume, actually, let me switch back to the Switch 2 when I yap about this, so it makes a bit more sense. You can tell that we're on the Live Gamer 4K because this ALLM option does not work when it should. And VRR isn't supported by the Live Gamer Ultra, the Live Gamer 4K GC573 as well. So give me a sec to switch back to, um, the Switch 2. All right, so what I assume is happening here with the Switch 2 is that there is there's still a firmware bug with LG or with certain TVs where 1440p is not selectable. This bug is purely on Nintendo's part, where for some reason on TVs 1440p 60 hertz isn't selectable, isn't working. There's some EDID handshaking problem where the system isn't recognizing the TV can handle 1440p 60 hertz. But it does work for 120 hertz, and you're not seeing that because the system will not. It will switch to 120 hertz when it is needed. But if I can't force it to 1440p, but on this, but yeah, but 1440p 120 hertz in HDR, for some reason, normally it functions as we saw when we connected it to the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1 capture card. But for some reason, and like directly into a TV, it'll work. But for some reason, with the Live Gamer 4K specifically, it doesn't work. And there's either two reasons why. One is because the system is trying to do full RGB color space for that, and the bandwidth of the HDMI 2.0 port in the Switch 2 on the dock is a little bit higher than a typical HDMI 2.0 bandwidth port. It's not to the level of 2.1 to be specified as 2.1, but it is higher than the 2.0 spec that is normally used. So because of that, as you saw in the PS5, it was doing YUV422 color space, not RGB. And that's probably why it's not working on the Switch 2, because it only does RGB or full 444 chroma, whatever. I assume that's what's going on. And the capture card that I have it hooked into only works at HDMI 2.0 bandwidth, which is less than what the Switch 2's dock port would be, I assume. I'm just guessing. Either that or it's a firmware issue with the capture card where it needs a firmware update to support it. So one of two things are going on here. Avermedia, please check your capture card, your Live Gamer 4K GC573, to get 1440p 120 hertz in HDR working on the card, or at least like try to push an update out to fix it. If you're Nintendo, maybe look into that, getting 1440p 120 hertz HDR working through HDMI 2.0 bandwidth. So yeah, it's really weird. Yeah, clearly there is a solution, because on the PS5 in 4K, it can't. I believe when hooked into the capture card, the Live Gamer 4K, you don't get 4K 60 RGB going through, or full 444 color space. It has to compress it. Whereas the Switch 2 will work in 4K 60 like it is right now in HDR, fine. Weirdly enough, so maybe it's able to do that compression, that 422 or 420 color space instead of RGB, and it just doesn't do it for 1440p for some reason. I don't know. I feel like it's a capture card problem. Because when we had it hooked into the Alienware DWF OLED monitor, it was listing 1440p 120 hertz working in HDR. It says it could do it, but it never was able to switch to it. So I feel like it is a capture card problem. But who knows? Maybe it is like an EDID issue with the Switch 2. But I don't know. It's been pretty consistent with my LG OLED so far, besides the firmware jank. So I don't know. Nintendo needs to update the Switch 2 again to do 1440p 60 hertz though. Get support out for that resolution and frame rate, or for that frame rate resolution, 1440p 60 hertz. As you can see, it does not function still on TVs. And then Avermedia needs to update their card to fix it to work with 1440p 120 HDR. So yeah, really weird stuff going on here with the Switch 2 displays capture card shenanigans. It is a mess. But yeah. Oh, and also to throw in an extra curveball, with audio. So the Switch 2, I'm gonna flip to automatic here. The Switch 2 for surround sound only does linear PCM 5.1 surround sound. To add in some mess to this, all same with the Switch 1, by the way. The only capture card that can do linear PCM 5.1 surround sound is the Avermedia Live Gamer 4K GC573. The new one, the 2.0 Live Gamer 4K, doesn't actually handle linear PCM surround sound, which is stupid. Um, yeah, it's basically a Live Gamer Ultra 2.1, but with a PCIe port instead of a USB. Great, because this card can do a bit more. Um, yeah, it's really stupid. Any Elgato card will pass through, and by the way, the Live Gamer Ultra 2.1 as well. They will pass through surround sound, like linear PCM surround sound, but they won't record it. They'll just cut out any of the speakers that aren't this left and right speakers. So like the center channel, the rear speakers, that all gets cut out from the recording. But um, on the Live Gamer 4K that I have in my computer that I'm using right now as we speak, I can flip to it, and I can go into to test output here, and you can see it is supported. If I turn up the capture card here, you'll hear the noises through each of the speakers. Yeah, that is because the capture card is down mixing surround sound to stereo. No other card does that on the market, period. And if I use Avermedia software, I think I can record surround sound. I think their streaming software, whatever it's called. What is it called? I have it on my taskbar. Avermedia Streaming Center. I think that will record surround sound on this capture card, but I'm not 100% sure. The Live Gamer Ultra 2.1, that one, when I run that test, you'll only hear the left and the right speaker. You won't hear the other speakers, the center, subwoofer, surround left, and surround right, the two in the back. You won't hear those speakers; they'll just be silent. When I would play this test, even though it is listed as recording surround sound, because that capture card will only record Dolby Audio from the PS5 or the Series X, basically. It won't do Dolby Atmos, but it'll do Dolby Digital. So yeah, really, really stupid. It won't actually do linear PCM sound. That is a hardware limitation that Avermedia has told me about with that capture card. So, yeah, kind of sucks. This card will do that too. It'll even downmix that Dolby Audio to stereo. Yeah, this capture card is very important to me. The new one, the 2.1, doesn't do that downmixing to stereo anymore. So yeah. Anywho, I digress. I'm getting off topic, but that's my ramble about capture cards today.